Zipper rolls out to the right, pitches off to Taylor, and Taylor's to the 20, down to the 15, down to 10, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Touchdown, Billy Taylor! Touchdown, Billy Taylor! Billy Taylor scored a touchdown from 21 yards out. The crowd goes berserk. It was November 22nd, 1969. That they came to Barry, Michigan, all dressed in maize and blue. The words were said, the prayers were read, and everybody cried. But when they closed the coffin, there was someone else inside. Oh, they came to Barry, Michigan, but Michigan wasn't dead. And when the game was over, it was someone else instead. 11 Michigan Wolverines put on the gloves of gray, and as the organ played the victors, they laid Woody Hayes away. Under center is Wangler at the 45. He goes back. He's looking for a receiver. He throws downfield to Carter. Who's got it better than us? Nobody!
Welcome to the Michigan Man Podcast on Wolverine Sports Radio, a member of the V Sporto Network, and in partnership with SB Nation's Maize and Brew, for Wolverine fans from coast to coast. Go Blue, and welcome to our Michigan Game Day show for the National Championship game on Monday night, which sounds nice, doesn't it? I'm your host, Mike Fitzpatrick. I'm behind this week like everyone covering Michigan and Washington because everyone is scrambling to get down to Houston. So today we'll be joined by Clayton Sayfie from the Wolverine ON3, and tomorrow Husky sideline reporter Elise Woodward will be with us on our Visitors Edition. Before Clayton jumps on, we'll hear some interesting thoughts on the game from Joel Klatt from his show earlier today concerning the keys to victory for Michigan and his pick in the game. First, let's get started with a very brief view from Section 17. I don't know about you, but I'm still exhausted from that epic Rose Bowl game on Monday. I can't remember watching a more stressful final Michigan drive and then the overtime, which was a classic. We will have all winter, heck, the rest of our lives to savor that game. In the meantime, there is one last piece of business to take care of. I like how we match up with Washington. They are scary on offense with Michael Penix, no doubt, but I think Jesse Minter and our defense will slow them down, at least some. I also like how we match up with the Huskies' defense. They are a bend but don't break kind of D that we are built to play against. I expect us to run the ball effectively, use the passing game smartly, eat up clock, and score points on these guys. If we can do that, we will limit their possessions, and they will be playing our game. This is a great matchup for us, much better than Alabama. It should be another nerve-wracker, though, but what a glorious night it could end up in Houston. On his show today, Joel Klatt said the key for Michigan is making Michael Penix uncomfortable.
The linebackers are going to have to play a big role in this matchup for Michigan, but mainly it's going to be about the defensive line's ability to make Penix uncomfortable. Now, I chose those words carefully because it's not just about sacks. Penix excels with accuracy, pitch selection, and leverage. So Michigan's going to have to make him uncomfortable, and in particular, push the pocket right back into his lap. I think that is the most important piece of Michigan's defensive game plan. Can the tackles do that? Now, it just so happens that's exactly how they're built.
Joel said Penix has to be elite in this game to beat Michigan.
I think it's imperative from Michigan's standpoint that they get pressure internal, that they limit possessions. It's imperative that Penix plays out of his mind. There's no other way that Washington can win this game. Penix is going to have to play great. They've got one lane to win this one. I think Michigan's got 3 or 4 lanes that they could possibly drive in order to win this game. Washington has one. The passing game is going to have to be elite. Elite, elite, elite. And guess what? It can be that because Michael Penix is that dude.
In the end, he sees a Michigan victory.
My official pick is going to be Michigan. I think Michigan wins. This team, this program, ever since COVID, was built specifically to beat Ohio State. And they will be facing maybe a better version, but a version of Ohio State.
My guest today says, enjoy the Bama win for another few days and get ready for a barn burner in the national championship game. Joining us next is Clayton Sayfie from the Wolverine ON3. I forgot to hit the record button for the intro, so we'll pick it up with Clayton describing the scene in Pasadena as the game ended. So stay with us.
The celebration was just epic. I mean, rose petals and confetti were flying everywhere, and the goalpost came down as soon as the game ended, and the stage comes out, and roses were in the mouths, and smiles were on the faces. Everything that went into getting that win, and celebrating that win, was a lot. But this team has to now turn around and play in a short turnaround, Mike, because usually it's 8 or 9 days in between these games. Sometimes I think it's even been 10 or 11 a couple times, just based on how the schedule and the calendar has played out. But since the Rose Bowl has to be on New Year's Day, and then they pair the other semifinal with that, and it happened to fall on a Monday, and they like to play the national championship game on a Monday, this is only a week in between. So you had Washington having to go from New Orleans back home and then down to Houston, Michigan back from Los Angeles and then down to Houston. So that kind of cuts into your preparation time as well. It's a good problem to have. It's certainly the problem that you hoped for. Jesse Minter told me that after the game, but it is something that you're going to have to guard against, worrying too much about what you did instead of looking ahead to what you have to do. I would liken it, though, to an experience Michigan's familiar with over the last few years, beating Ohio State. I mean, nothing's more emotionally high than that. And then you have to come back a week later and play in the Big Ten championship game. So I think that's an experience these guys can draw on. Washington had the same type of thing. They had a rivalry game and then went and had to play Oregon in the biggest game of their year to that point, the Pac-12 championship. So I think both teams will be ready. I think when you talk to these Michigan players, they keep giving that Kobe Bryant line, the job's not finished. So they understand. They didn't come here this time to just win one. I think that was a huge monkey off the back. But now they want to win the next one, and then you do that, and you're 15-0. I mean, it'll probably be the best team in Michigan history.
Well, there's so much to talk about right now, but for starters, just for a few minutes, let's go back to Monday and the Rose Bowl, because it was so glorious. And I'm still amazed at the offensive game plan and how it confused Alabama. I mean, Sharon Moore, and I'm sure Jim Harbaugh had his fingers in that. They just had a brilliant game plan, didn't they?
They did. And, I just got done talking about this on our podcast as well, because I rewatched the game, and we were discussing, all right, a few days have passed, you've rewatched things, you've looked at it a little bit more closely, and now what is the most impressive part of this game? And to me, it was the coaching. The way Michigan came out and threw different things at Alabama, like you said, that they didn't expect. It's interesting with these bowl games because you have a month to prepare. So in theory, you don't know any opponent throughout the year better than you're going to know this opponent, right? Mm-hmm. But with that month, knowing that the other team has a month, you're going to throw in some new things. And both teams did that. I think Michigan did it much more and much better than Alabama. And I think Jim Harbaugh and his staff outcoached Nick Saban and his staff. But let's just think back to Michigan's first scoring drive in this game. All the different wrinkles that they pulled out on that. I believe that was the one where Kalel Mullins catches the pass. He's a guy that's come in and been a short yardage guy and a blocking back. And I do love what he brings in those areas. But then they throw a pass to him. Then Blake Corum, when it was second down, they could have gotten the first. It wasn't second and goal, but they were inside the 10 there. And I was thinking to myself, and I said out loud to Chris Vallis next to me, I said, run Blake here. Well, they sneak him out of the backfield and throw a touchdown to him. And, that's the type of thing they haven't done with Blake Corum this year. So they were able to get him open. That was one of the first of many times in this game as well that Sharon Moore was able to get his running backs and his slot receivers matched up with Alabama's linebackers. Alabama's linebackers were targeted in coverage 6 times. They allowed 6 receptions for 82 yards and 3 touchdowns. Roman Wilson had a linebacker on him on the final touchdown. Blake on that touchdown that I just mentioned. And Tyler Morris had Deontay Lawson, number 32, on him on his 38-yard touchdown. So what Sharon Moore did to get his guys in favorable matchups in a game in which the other team has better athletes than you, I thought was masterful. Obviously, Jim Harbaugh, the rest of the staff had a hand in that. And then Jesse Minter, the different fronts and blitzes and then the coverages subsequently that he was able to throw at Jalen Milroe was incredible. And to get to him early, and I think Jesse Minter knew they had to do that. I want to ask him about this weekend when we get to talk to him. But to get to him early, I think he understood that they had to do that to make him uncomfortable, to take some confidence away from that Alabama offensive line going into the rest of the game. So they executed exactly what they wanted to do. There were portions of this game that did not go the way Michigan wanted it to, but then obviously at the end, I'm sure that's almost felt like a different game in a way, the last drive and then the way things finished out in overtime. But obviously credit to the players and everybody for staying with it there, because things didn't go all that well for the offense in the second half until then, and then they made the plays they had to. They really needed it on the 4th down and at the goal line, and then in overtime they made those plays when they had to, and that's what was so incredible about this victory.
Yeah, and I have to admit, I'm a worrywart about a lot of things, or I was going into that game, and one of the biggest worries for me was the offensive line and how they would handle that Bama front, especially the reshuffled offensive line. But other than that patch in the second half where they were struggling, they were very, very good, weren't they?
They were, and look, you're playing without a unanimous All-American in Zach Zinter, and you're playing with a guy at guard who's played tackle most of the year. And honestly, guard is probably the best spot for Carson Barnhart. He's going to the NFL, he said, after this year, and I think he goes in there as a guard prospect, right? But Trente Jones comes in at right tackle, a guy that, has been really close to kind of securing a full-time starting job, but just hasn't quite done it yet during his Michigan career. He had it in 2022 until he got hurt. So, I mean, it's a drop-off, right, when you don't have a unanimous All-American out there. But the way those guys played, the way Drake Nugent played, I thought Trevor Keegan from the beginning as well, a lot of those key plays on that first touchdown scoring drive that we just talked about, Trevor Keegan blew his guy back. He was out pulling, leading the way, and you needed that out of your most experienced, your best leader on the offensive line early on in the game. Michigan set the tone on both lines that they were going to dominate the line of scrimmage. They did that most of the game, and then but you're right. I mean, J.J. McCarthy was kept clean most of the day. They got the ball out quick in other situations as well. And that allowed them to have a chance because those are great athletes on the other side, great edge rushers, fantastic cornerbacks that Alabama has. But Michigan was able to find ways to move the football in not a overly traditional sense, but just kind of picking their spots here and there, and then the gadget plays when they needed them. It really should have hit the flea flicker as well, but they just kind of had everything when they needed it, but it starts up front, no question.
And JJ got off to somewhat of a shaky start, got away with one that, should have been an interception. Luckily, the defensive back's back of his cleats were out of bounds, but hey, we'll take it. But he seemed nervous in the early going, didn't he, Clayton?
I mean, I could not believe that first pass. Like, I just couldn't believe it. I was like, this is, this is TCU, like, all over again, kind of, and really really one of the TCU pick sixes was just kind of a pass, like he didn't see the guy or whatever. So it was not like that was nerves or anything, but you just felt like he was going to play differently this time. He ended up doing that, but the first play was just absolutely wild that happened. And fortunately for Michigan, he was out of bounds before it. So you get a chance to regroup a little bit. And I thought, which is funny because it definitely seemed like nerves, and he could have thrown that ball earlier and everything else. And then trying to throw it away. I think really one of the biggest things J.J. McCarthy did in this game was stay positive, stay calm. Before that final drive with 4:39 to go, the TV camera shows J.J. McCarthy walk past Jim Harbaugh on the sideline. They didn't exchange a single word. They fist bumped and gave each other a nod where it's like, okay, we know exactly what the mission is here. We know what we have to do. So J.J. McCarthy, I know Jim Harbaugh's talked about it for a couple of years now, how he's unflappable. And I think part of him was trying to almost speak that into existence over the last couple of years, but it was never more evident than in that moment, the way he was able to lead the team down on the touchdown drive. But he made other big plays. I mean, the catch he made on the double pass from Donovan Edwards to then throw it as he's getting clobbered by Dallas Turner to Roman Wilson in other plays. I mean, he had a couple drops by his receivers, but J.J. McCarthy, with the ball in his hands at the end, showed that he was the better quarterback in this game. And really a couple other third downs, too, I thought were the difference, where Michigan trusted him to make the play and Alabama didn't trust Jalen Milroe. So sometimes you don't want to oversimplify things by saying the better quarterback's going to win the game, but it's kind of what happened in this one, even though there were so many other factors at play. But at the end of the day, it was number 9 that was able to lead his team down to tie the game and send it to overtime.
There is no question JJ was clutch when he had to be in a drive we'll remember forever. Also clutch, Blake Corum. I mean, catching the big passes out of the backfield, the 18-yard touchdown run in overtime, the great pass blocking, which I think gets overlooked a lot, and then in general, the leadership. I mean, that was the kind of performance that we will remember forever, isn't it, Clayton?
I said it at the time after he scored. I said I would say he just became a legend, but Blake Corum's been a legend, and he just keeps adding to his legend status with all these games. And you think of the Penn State run late to clinch that one. And this is taken out even last year and all the things he did there. But, he had the game clincher against Penn State. Then he has the one after the Zach Zinter injury against Ohio State. I mean, legendary moments, but nothing bigger than what he did on that run, which was an insane jump cut and then just absolute will to get into the end zone and rumble and, keep his balance. I mean, that's one of my favorite runs of all time already. And again, it's just one more thing that Blake Corum has done. But Mike, I'll say this, like coming into the game, and I'm guilty of it too, I think, but there was so much talk about how's Michigan gonna handle Jalen Milroe and the SEC speed and the SEC physicality and Nick Saban, but no one. And there was some talk about which quarterback's going to play better, but no one really talked about Blake Corum. Everyone just kind of lumped him in with, the Michigan run game, it's been pretty good. And Blake Corum is an elite running back. I think he's the best running back, in my opinion, in the country. I think he has been 2 straight years, or right up there. You could say Bijan Robinson last year, but no one talked about that. But at the end of the day, he was probably the best player on the field when it mattered, right up there with, J.J. McCarthy and Roman Wilson on a couple plays. But number 2 was one of the best players out there, and he showed that at the end. He was not going to be denied, and he wasn't denied. And, man, the fact that we get one more chance to watch him on Monday night do what he came back to do. I mean, I was there on the field at the Fiesta Bowl last year, kind of following him around and taking a couple of videos as he crutched around and signed autographs for Michigan fans who were chanting, one more year, one more year. Well, he comes back for another year for this, and now he's got his team right where he wants them.
Oh, absolutely. He had us smiling at the end of the game on Monday night, and hopefully the same thing this coming Monday night. Another thing that I think had us all smiling, and you alluded to this earlier, was how the defense started the game, and then the entire defensive performance the rest of the way. Jesse Minter put on a masterclass on how to defend Alabama, didn't he?
He sure did. Everything about this defensive performance was a masterclass. I mean, when you think of it's funny because throughout the year, a couple times we're like, there'll be Cam Good in there or Rayshawn Benny in there to start a drive. And I would kind of say, like, you got Kenneth Grant, Chris Jenkins, and Mason Graham. Like, they just, watch the offense go on a 5-minute drive. I mean, you really need the backups in at this time. But the fact that they developed that depth, knowing that at some point they were going to need it, and then they needed it against Alabama, where they're rotating fresh guys in and out. I mean, the final stop, there was Josiah Stewart is in there. He's not a starter. Derek Moore was in there. He's not a starter. Maybe one more guy that is more of a rotational guy. They needed all hands on deck up front, and they got big performances from all of them. Derek Moore, Josiah Stewart, Braden McGregor, Jalen Harrell, obviously, but KG, Mason Graham, Chris Jenkins, Cam Good. I mean, that's a lot of guys. Like, other teams don't rotate that much. So, to me, watching that game, that stood out to me. But the linebackers, the way they ran, the way that the secondary open field tackled, especially after the long run early on where Mikey Sainer still missed on that tackle, but the coverage as well. I mean, everything worked together perfectly in unison. And one of the things that these players talked about coming off of last year was that they felt like the defense was very good, but it wasn't always in sync and they weren't always connected with each other, from interior D-line to the edges to the D-line to the linebackers, that sort of thing. But it just felt like something that they wanted to fix, something that they did fix, and that's something that, really paid off in this game. But, what Jesse Minter did with some of the creative blitzes and different looks to try to confuse Jalen Milroe was fantastic. And Milroe said before the game, too, that, nothing Michigan will throw at him will be something he hasn't seen in the SEC. I beg to differ a little bit, I would say. I think Jesse Minter was probably licking his chops there when he heard that comment. Of course, it got brought up back on social media after the game, but long-winded way of saying that Jesse Minter and that defense, the whole staff did a wonderful job.
No question about it. And sticking with that defensive line for just another minute, last week, in prepping and getting ready for the game, I was talking to, several of the Alabama beat writers, a couple of their podcasters, and they were asking a lot of questions about the defensive line. And, a couple of them said, hey, we know the D-line is good, but look who they played against in the Big Ten. But, the day after, we can say with assurance is that, that defensive line, you thought they were good. You now know they are good. That is an elite front.
It is. And it's interesting because I think part of it is like when especially if you're on the Alabama side, maybe you didn't watch Michigan all year, you're kind of trying to look at the stats, right? Okay, where's the one guy? Where's the Aiden Hutchinson or the David Ajabo or whatever it is that has 10 sacks or 15 or, Aiden had 14 that year. There isn't that guy. And honestly, part of me throughout the year too questioned how good this D-line was because, sometimes you do want that one player that the other team has to scheme to take away, then it frees up other guys, that sort of thing. But to me, this D-line is great because it plays together, because I think they're stronger at interior defensive line than I've probably ever seen in my lifetime. And that really, too, Mike, when you think back to when Michigan last played Alabama, January 1, 2020, Jess Spate, no disrespect to him, but Jess Spate started that game at defensive tackle. Earlier that season, not Mason Graham, Ben Mason, moved from fullback to defensive tackle. The position group that has improved the most since Michigan played Alabama to start 2020 to now is defensive tackle. And that's a huge position to, have as a strength if you're going to go up against these SEC teams. Michigan has been able to close the gap with these guys. Alabama has, according to one metric, the second most talented roster of all time this season. But it was Michigan that looked like they had more dudes out there and looked like the better team on Monday. So credit the coaches, the development, all that, but also just the way those guys played, and including on the defensive line. So you can't hang with the Alabamas and the Georgias if you're not strong at the line of scrimmage. And even from 2 years ago, I think of the difference in Michigan's D-line overall. I know you had Aiden, but when they face Georgia compared to now, I think it's a significant increase in talent and the way they're developed. So another long-winded way of saying that, the D-line was such a big key in this game.
Yeah, and I thought it was funny the day after the game, Clayton, when, some in the media, a lot of them from the SEC were saying, Michigan's good, but this is the worst Saban team in the last 15 years. You get to hear a lot of that. But for Michigan, nothing can cheapen that win and what it means to the program, can it?
No, not at all. And I know, now that they're in the national championship, you're getting even more noise and even more talk because some people nationally are just now honing back in on Michigan. Obviously, the cheating stuff, the talk that they're gonna say. Look what they've done down the stretch this season, including in a few games without their head coach. That's one thing. And then two, to go back kind of to what your point was, you're still playing Nick Saban. Like I said, the metric that says this, according to, on paper, recruiting rankings and all that, is one of the most talented rosters in the history of college football. So this is still Alabama. And this is, look, one day before the game, everyone was talking about how Michigan should be the underdog, and this is still Nick Saban, and they have a lot of talent, and Milroe was a Heisman, top number 6 in the Heisman voting, and that this team's red hot, and that they're not the same team that played Texas earlier in the year. I could go on and on and on. But then the day after the game, they're trying to make the excuses. You can't have it both ways. Michigan played probably a C game in terms of execution and really almost blew that game based on how much they dominated it in the first half. But at the end, it was Nick Saban standing on one sideline, Michigan driving down, scoring, and winning in overtime. And it was so epic. And as we've kind of talked about, so nobody can take this one away from them. For
Absolutely
sure. And Michigan
not.
fans will remember it forever.
Yes, It was a thing of beauty. And now we have Monday night in Houston, Michigan against Washington for the national championship. And when you think of the Huskies, at least me anyway, Michael Penix jumps out at you. And this is not the same quarterback we saw during those many injury-riddled Big Ten years. He has become arguably the most dangerous quarterback in college football, hasn't he, Clayton?
He has, and he had terrible luck early in his career. I mean, 4 straight years of having season-ending injuries, I believe it was.
Mm-hmm.
And he was good, in those times. And I think he was especially good when Kalen DeBoer, now his head coach, was his offensive coordinator at Indiana. So those two have been a lethal pairing. Obviously, what they've done, and then you combine that with elite wide receiver play. I mean, 3 NFL wide receivers on that offense, and the Joe Moore award-winning offensive line to protect him. Then I think you're looking at a really potent offense. Clearly, they've only had 11 sacks surrendered all year long on 522 passes. That's remarkable. So look, Texas has a fantastic defensive line. Similar to Michigan, really built similar, with some really big and fantastic defensive tackles. But, but Texas wasn't able to do a ton against that Washington O-line. This Michigan defensive line that we just talked about at length, has a big challenge ahead of them because you got to pressure him. You look at the defensive backfield, it's going to be a big challenge for them as well against these Washington receivers. Rome Odunze is one of the best in the country with, I believe, over 1,500 yards. I look at it, and I thought Mason Graham had a really good comment on Wednesday when he wasn't even here at the time, but he said that they're kind of drawn back to 2021 Ohio State when they had all those receivers, great quarterback in C.J. Stroud, and how they had to contain them. So the one thing that works in Michigan's favor here is that they are kind of built and they prepare year-round for Ohio State, which has a similar style to Washington. So now they can kind of, ditch the Alabama game plan, which was completely different playing against a mobile quarterback, and go back into maybe what they did against Ohio State. So it's going to be a really interesting game because Washington wants to play this one in the 40s or 50s. Michigan wants to play this one in the 20s or 30s. So it'll be kind of fascinating to see what the game flow kind of looks like.
Yeah, and when we think about this Washington team, or even if we had a chance to see them this year, I mean, the passing game is what you remember and what scares you. But this Huskies offense is even more dangerous in that they just are not a passing team. I mean, these guys can run the ball, and Dylan Johnson went over 1,000 yards this year. He's a very dangerous back. But even if he plays, it looks like he's dinged up, isn't he, Clayton?
Yeah, and that's one of the key storylines going into this one, and maybe a little bit of gamesmanship being played by Washington, and Kalen DeBoer saying that he expects that he will play. Now, he's been playing banged up for a while, but he gets carted off there at the end, which ironically stopped the clock, gave Texas time on their final drive to take several shots into the end zone. So that was just kind of something that really caused them almost to blow the Texas game. But he's rushed for, you said the number, well over 1,000 yards. Nobody else on their team has rushed, I believe, for over 200 yards. So he has been their running game. And that would be a significant loss. So I don't think even if he plays, he's going to be anywhere near 100%. And if that could make them more one-dimensional, we know Michigan, really their first priority is to stop the run. So that's going to be their goal anyway. But if they could play one-dimensional, then I think Michigan could be set up a little bit better defensively. And going back to, what we said with the way Jesse Minter mixes things up and throws different looks at opposing quarterbacks that they haven't seen before. Penix has seen a lot. He's been in college football, I think, 6 years. But I think Jesse Minter has an opportunity here to prove his worth again in another biggest game ever, biggest game of his career. And so we'll kind of see what game plan he comes up with.
Yeah, I'm already excited to see what Jesse throws at them on Monday. But another impressive aspect of this offense is that you mentioned it, they have that Joe Moore award-winning offensive line. They've only allowed 11 sacks and over 500 passing attempts. I think a lot of that is because Penix gets rid of the ball really quickly too.
Right.
But it sets up a fascinating matchup with that Michigan front, doesn't it?
It does. And I think, again, I know we've talked a lot about Minter in this show, but Jesse Minter, and, maybe you won't beat them in some of these one-on-ones, but can they use some of those stunts and twists? And, whether it's bringing more than 4 guys on a blitz or not, but just the creativity where they don't know who's coming where, right, is kind of one of the big things with this Ravens-style defense that Michigan runs. So it's going to be important for Michigan to get that going and try to confuse them a little bit. If you can confuse the offensive line and, they don't know where a guy's coming, and maybe you get a free rusher like Michigan was able to get a couple times against Alabama, then you can start to confuse the quarterback as well, because then he doesn't know where the rush is coming from either. So that's going to be really important. But this O-line, Tavondre Sweat is probably the best defensive tackle in the country for Texas. He didn't do a whole lot against Washington. They were able to just kind of stuff him inside. So it's not going to be easy by any means. And Michigan's going to have to be able to find a way to get pressure, because you don't want to have to cover these wide receivers for more than a few seconds.
Last week at this time, though, I was nervous about how the Michigan offense was going to do against that Alabama defense. I could be right, I could be wrong. I'm not nearly as worried this week about that Washington defense. I know they've come up clutch and they're a bend but don't break kind of a defense, but I feel really good that Michigan is going to move the ball on these guys. Don't you, Clayton?
Yeah, I do too. And I think specifically it'll be on the ground. Washington's really good in the trenches on the offensive side. Their D-line is a little bit closer to average. And when Washington has played teams that are more comparable to a Michigan in terms of talent, in terms of, especially talent up front, those teams have been able to run the ball on them. You look at Oregon the first time they played, over 200 yards, a couple touchdowns, 5.1 yards per carry. Oregon the second time they played them, 6.2 yards per carry. Texas in this last game, just a couple days ago, 6.4 yards per carry, 3 touchdowns on the ground. USC was able to run on them, other teams as well. So I think it's going to start there. It's going to be another Blake Corum type of game. It's going to have to be a good game plan by Michigan as well to mix things up, play action, that sort of thing. But I do think that Michigan should be able to move the football much better than it did against Alabama, especially in the second half until the final drive. And that's going to be important, because Washington is probably going to be able to score a little bit more on Michigan than Alabama did too. So, we may be looking at a 38-35 or, God forbid, I feel like Washington would like this, but, a 42-41 type of thing. Michigan's offense has to be able to answer. The defense isn't going to be able to get a stop every single time. So it's going to be important that they have a higher level of execution than they did in this last game, because, the margin is going to be small, where if Washington can score quick and you don't answer, you could find yourself down 14 in a hurry.
And you mentioned this should be a big game for Blake. We expect that it will be. And J.J. McCarthy, watching this Washington defense, you've got to think the tight ends are going to be more involved this week. It's going to be there for them, but it would be great if J.J. got off to a quick start, but he needs to play big.
Yeah, it would be. It'll be interesting to see, too, what kind of nerves both sides have, including with the quarterbacks and J.J., just because this is a different stage, maybe playing on the big stage in the semis just a week before will kind of ease things. But JJ's got to start fast. The receivers can't be dropping any passes. We saw a couple key drops in this past game, especially the one to Maj Morgan. But JJ's got to be on point. And like I said, I think that this team may have to put up 38 points on offense to win. And that means you're going to have to be good for 60 minutes. You can't have any lulls. But like you astutely pointed out, this defense is much easier to play against, I think. Maybe not much easier, but easier to play against than Alabama. So I think it's just going to be a completely different game. And, Michigan definitely used their bag of tricks there in the Alabama game. They're going to have to find, a couple other wrinkles that they can use. But it is interesting, too, with this game where you only have a week to prepare. So the other team doesn't know you as well as, maybe they would if it was a bowl game. So it fascinates me to see maybe what kind of game plan we're going to get from each side, because I feel like you're going to play this one a little bit more straight up. I know you had analysts looking ahead and giving them a nice scouting report once the game on Monday ended, but it's just a different setup than a bowl game.
Much bigger setup than a bowl game. So final question before we let you get away, though, Clayton. On a scale of 1 to 10, how do you feel about Michigan's chances of beating Washington and winning the national championship this Monday night in Houston?
Yeah, I'm gonna go with a 6. And maybe say that I think there's a 60% chance if that's kind of an acceptable answer. To put it into percentages. I do think Michigan's gonna win by a score or two, but I think it's gonna be pretty close throughout. And it's kind of some of the things that we talked about, where I think Michigan can move the football, and I think that the Michigan defense should be able to hold up if they can avoid allowing some of those big plays. You may allow 31, but that could mean a win as well against this Washington team. So mix things up, make sure that Michael Penix has everything that you have thrown at him, and then let the chips fall where they may. But this team has talked about getting to this spot and capitalizing on it since a year ago at this time. And the fact that they're here, the fact that they did what they did in the Rose Bowl is insane. Absolutely incredible. I mean, it doesn't happen. It never has happened. They've never gotten to a national championship game. So enjoy this one to all the Michigan fans out there, because it's been a special ride, and job's not finished. As they said, they still got one more to go, and I think it's going to be a really, really fun game on Monday.
With us today has been Clayton Sayfie from the Wolverine magazine and the Wolverine On3. And Clayton, I know you've got your bags packed and you are heading down to Houston. It's going to be a lot of fun. Who knows? We might never get to do this again. So enjoy everything you do as far as the coverage, the player access, and of course the game on Monday. And thank you for your time, and we'll be sure to have you on soon, and we'll have, as always, a lot to talk about.
Absolutely. Well, appreciate you having me, and enjoy the game.
On Quick Hits today, no injury updates so far this week. The teams will be down in Houston tomorrow, and there will be a flurry of media events as the hype grows and grows each day until Monday. So we might get some news in the next few days. As I said at the top of the show, our schedule is like everyone else's covering both teams, so that's why we're late in getting our shows up this week. Saturday, the Visitors Edition will air, and our guest will be Huskies radio sideline reporter Elise Woodward. So make sure you join us. That will do it for now. I'm your host, Mike Fitzpatrick. Have a great Wolverine week, everyone. Enjoy this, because who knows if we'll ever get back to another championship game. We hope so, but we've waited a long time for this, and what a ride it's been. Until we meet again, take care, and as always, go blue. Thanks for joining us today on The Michigan Man, here on Wolverine Sports Radio, a member of the V-Sporto Network, and in partnership with SB Nation's Maize and Brew. Our listener lines are open 24/7 for your calls at 313-263-4842. That's 313-263-4842. Or email us at themichiganmanpodcast@yahoo.com. That's themichiganmanpodcast@yahoo.com. The Michigan Man Podcast is produced at the studios of Robin Lynn Productions, Allen Park, Michigan, and is not affiliated with the University of Michigan. Go Blue!